All right, so you've been diagnosed with a thyroid condition. Now what? Well, maybe you haven't been diagnosed with a thyroid condition, but you suspect that you have one. Maybe you told your doctor that you were feeling issues with gaining weight, hair loss, kind of memory issues, sleep issues, things like that. And they didn't even run blood work, but they told you that you have a thyroid condition. Well, where do we go from here? So chances are if your doctor told you that you have a thyroid condition, they at the very least ran a hormone called TSH. So what TSH stands for is thyroid stimulating hormone. That's a hormone that's produced in the brain by the pituitary. What it does is it signals to your thyroid gland to release hormone. Now, what your thyroid is going to do is release about 90% T4, about 10% T3. So T4 is not the active form of thyroid hormone. That's actually T3. What's going to happen is different places in your body, like your gut, like your muscles, like your liver, are going to start to convert that T4 into T3, which is a much more active form of the thyroid hormone. That's then going to go into your cells, act on your DNA, cause you to increase protein synthesis. Those proteins are then going to go and drive metabolic pathways. So thyroid hormone is really cool. It works differently than a lot of other hormones, and it works globally over almost the entire body because of the way that it acts on the DNA to actually increase protein synthesis, increase metabolism, increase all that stuff. So where are we at? We were talking about TSH, right? So typically speaking, if you go to your medical practitioner, what they're going to run first is TSH. And what they'll do is they'll run TSH with a reflex to free T4. Now, what that means is that T4 is only going to be run if TSH is out of range. Now, the problem with that is, again, T4 is not the active hormone. It's the most produced hormone, but it's not the active hormone. So we can have issues in a lot of different areas, and that's what we're going to talk about is, I have a thyroid issue. Where do I go from here? What are those other areas that I could have problems with that could be affecting thyroid function? What's my medical doctor going to do next? So I was given a medication. Now what's the plan? Those are all very valid questions, and it's understandable to have those. So we're going to kind of make some sense. Now, my goal with you is to help you make decisions that are based on facts, making sure that you can make as kind of comprehensive of a decision as possible, right? And so we can't make an informed decision if we don't have all the facts. So let's talk about the facts. We talked about TSH, we talked about T4, we talked about T3. Now there's another really important hormone that we have to look at if we want to understand what thyroid function is doing. You have to look at a hormone called reverse T3. Now the reason for that is because your body produces T4, converts it into T3 under normal circumstances. Now how about if your body's really stressed out? Well, our body's smart. It doesn't make mistakes. It's always trying to protect itself, right? And it's always adapting and responding to our environment. So if we're really stressed out, the thing about stress hormone is it brings us up. So thyroid hormone also brings us up. Your body's really smart. It doesn't want two hormones that are both taking us up at the same time. And so in order to protect that, if we're under a lot of stress, if that cortisol is really high, we're going to start increasing thyroid hormone, or we're going to start increasing the conversion of T4 into reverse T3. And what that does is it inactivates the hormone to make sure that we don't have two things driving us up at the same time. So let's talk about all the different areas that we can start to actually have problems with the thyroid. So when we look at thyroid conditions in the office, we're looking for four main things. There's four main reasons that you may have a thyroid issue. We can have either a production issue, we can have a conversion issue, a destruction issue, or an interference issue. Now, a production issue is probably the most common globally. This is typically the only thing that's going to be fixed if by taking a thyroid medication. A production issue simply is that we're just not producing enough thyroid hormone. Now, there's a lot of different reasons that this can happen. We can either not have the building blocks to produce the hormone. The gland cannot be functioning properly. We could not be getting the proper signals to the gland. And those are all treated differently. But if all we're looking at is TSH and T4, what this is going to look like on lab work is we're going to have a high TSH and a low T4. So TSH is really part of the feedback loop. If our T4 drops in the blood, the body's going to recognize that we need more hormone. It's going to increase the production of TSH so that we can increase the secretion of T4 from the body. So if we're just looking at blood work, what it's going to look like if we have a production issue, for the most part, is that we're going to have an elevated TSH and a decreased T4 level. Now, this is the only thyroid condition that's actually going to be improved by taking medication. The reason for that is because the other issues are not with the production, they're with either the utilization or the conversion of thyroid hormone, or there's something else going on within the body that's affecting your ability to utilize that hormone appropriately. So it doesn't matter if we give you more hormone. If we're not utilizing it properly, it's not going to make a difference. In a case of a destruction issue, we have an issue with like cancer, like an autoimmune condition, Hashimoto's, Graves', things like that, where we're actually damaging the thyroid tissue itself. And if that's the case, we can take more hormone. Now, a destruction issue can absolutely cause a production issue, and it may even show up as a production issue. But if we don't look at antibodies and we don't look a little bit deeper to understand that there's a destruction issue going on, then we're going to just be covering that up, and the thyroid is going to continue to get worse over time instead of better, because we're just taking a medication to fill the void for the lack of production, right? So say we just have a simple production issue. You put on something called Synthroid or levothyroxine. Those are the two most common thyroid medications, and what those are synthetic versions of T4. So again, T4 is the most commonly produced. It's also one of the only hormones that gets tested on a regular basis for the thyroid. So if we look at your thyroid hormones, your TSH is high, your T4 is low, we give you a synthetic version of T4, well, all should be happy, right? Well, yeah, and you may actually feel a lot better. And the reality is a lot of people do feel better when they take thyroid hormone medications. About 90 million prescriptions of thyroid medication get written each year in the United States alone. So this is something that a lot of people deal with. The problem is that most people who are put on a medication like that, they're never really shown a clear path off. They're just told, take this, you're going to have to take it for the rest of your life. Once you start taking it, you can't ever stop taking it. And the reality is that that's not actually the case. And that's why if we want to be able to make an informed decision, we have to know all the information. If the only information you've ever been told is that you have to take the medication for the rest of your life, then you're making a decision without the facts. And the facts are you can get off the medication, but only if we understand what's truly going on within the body. So that's why really trying to dive in and look at more blood work to see what's going on specifically is so important. So again, we could have a production issue, a conversion issue, a destruction issue, or an interference issue. Most of the people who we work with in our office on a regular basis aren't having production issues because they're the type of person who took the medication, they feel great, all their problems went away. Why would they continue to seek care? They feel great, right? Unless you just don't want to take that medication anymore. And then we have to look at number one, do we have a production issue because something's destroying the gland? That's absolutely a possibility. That could be something like an autoimmune condition. It could be something like cancer. It could be something like a nodule. We can have cold nodules or hot nodules. So a nodule can either destroy function or a nodule can actually increase production of hormone outside of the regular feedback loop. So hot nodules can actually cause hyperthyroidism. But that's a topic for another video. Hyperthyroidism is not nearly as common as hypothyroidism. And most people in the United States diagnosed with thyroid issues, it's hypothyroid that we're talking about. The only reason that we could have a production issue that we have to take medication is if you actually had your thyroid removed, or if you had like a radiofrequency ablation, or something that actually targeted and destroyed the thyroid tissue. So if that's you, then you are going to have to take medication. If it's not you and you still have functioning thyroid tissue, then we can work to heal that tissue and get it to start functioning normally again. But we have to understand again, is there something that's actively destroying the tissue that we have to get that response to calm down first? Or do we not have enough building blocks? Are we damaging the thyroid by producing thyroid hormone? And that's maybe a topic for another video as well. But the thyroid hormone production process actually creates free radicals, and that creates a lot of damage. So understanding that if we're going to increase the thyroid's production, we also have to do things to make sure that we're not continuing to damage the thyroid. So that's really important to understand. Now, let's say that we're taking the medication, but nothing changed. And I see this all the time where people get put on thyroid medication. Maybe they just found it randomly in blood work. They were given levothyroxine, just a small dose, and it's been 10 or 20 years and they're still taking it, but they don't really know why. They feel fine. They never felt different when they started taking it. And maybe they've missed a couple doses here and there over the years and didn't really feel a problem when they stopped taking it either. Chances are, if that's you, you don't have a production issue. You may not even have a thyroid issue to begin with, but it's probably either a conversion issue, interference issue, or a destruction issue. So let's talk about a conversion issue. And we kind of talked about this a little bit a second ago, but a conversion issue is mainly going to be where we have a problem with converting T4 into T3, where either we're not pushing that pathway, or what we see more potently or more commonly is that there's a lot of stress going on and our cortisol levels are really high. And because our cortisol levels are so high, because we're so ramped up and stressed all the time, our body's not pushing into T3. It's pushing into that other hormone called reverse T3. And again, that's an inactivated form. So if we just look at blood work, this is a situation where blood work could show TSH is high, it could show T4 is low, It could show that T3 is low, or it could look normal on blood work, but you have all the symptoms of low thyroid hormone because all they looked at were TSH and T4. And this is a situation where both of those could be normal on blood work, but your T3 is low. And the only way to really know that is if you test T3. In this situation, it's also very important to test reverse T3 because then we can see if there's a production issue upstream or a conversion issue. If I see that TSH and T4 are normal, T3 is low and reverse T3 is low, I know that the issue is somewhere else. If I see that T3 is low but reverse T3 is super high, then I know it's a stress issue, and we're never going to fix the thyroid without first handling the stress issue. And this is why it's so important to understand this before you just get put on a medication, because if your body's trying to protect itself by avoiding that stress pathway or by avoiding having two things taking you up like this, and we just give you a medication, well, you're just going to bombard that system and overload it, and we could end up really ramped up and with a lot of other symptoms that we don't want. One of the most common being hyperthyroid symptoms. So if you take the medication, if you feel way worse, if you feel jittery, anxious, difficulty staying asleep, your hair starts to get thin and brittle, your skin starts to get really thin and papery, that's a pretty good sign that you're taking either too much medication or the medication's not helping you because your problem's not production. Then we can talk about destruction. So destruction, the easiest way to look at this is by looking at antibodies. So destruction can either be an autoimmune condition, it could be a nodule, or it could be cancer. And so if we want to look at antibody formation in the blood, there's three main antibodies that we'll look for. We can look for thyroid peroxidase antibodies or TPO antibodies. We'll look for antithyroglobulin antibodies, or we'll look for thyroid stimulating immunoglobulins or TSI. So thyroglobulin and thyroid peroxidase are the two most common antibodies that we'll see in blood work. Most people aren't going to be looking for thyroid stimulating immunoglobulin. And the reason for that is because that's actually going to increase the production of thyroid hormone outside of your normal thyroid hormone feedback loop without increasing TSH. So someone with a really high TSI level is actually going to be more presenting of someone with hyperthyroidism. And again, most people are not hyperthyroid, they're hypothyroid. So we're going to be looking mostly for TPO and TBG antibodies there. Okay, so say we have antibodies that show up. Now we're not dealing with a thyroid issue, we're dealing with an immune system issue. Yeah, the thyroid hormones are affected. Yeah, we feel like we have all the symptoms of hypothyroidism. And yes, the medication may help you feel better. But the problem is that something is triggering the immune response to go after the thyroid. So either we've got something that's constantly stimulating the immune system and we have to figure out what that is so we can calm it down, or we have to just understand that the immune system's job is to identify foreign invaders, but its job is also to recognize self tissue and compare that to non-self tissue. So the body creates millions of cells on a regular basis. Not all of them are formed properly. And your immune system has this really cool ability to be able to recognize that those cells are not formed properly and to actually clear those out and get rid of them. And so now let's say that we have something that gets absorbed into the thyroid tissue. So say mercury, lead, heavy metals, something like that the thyroid gland absorbs. And this actually happens pretty frequently because the thyroid gland is a fatty tissue. And your body, again, is always trying to protect itself. So if it can't clear toxins out of the body, it's going to start storing them in fat to try to protect itself. So the thyroid does actually have a high affinity for heavy metals and things like that. The thyroid also has a high affinity for things like chloride, fluoride, and bromide. All of those are in the same category in the periodic table of elements as iodine, which is what you need to create thyroid hormone. So if you have excessive chloride, fluoride, or bromide circulating within the system, your thyroid's going to start taking that up into the tissue instead of taking up iodine. And if your thyroid tissue has absorbed heavy metals, it's absorbed chloride, it's absorbed fluoride, then it's not actually healthy tissue anymore. So then it stands to reason that the immune response will start to go after that as a way to try to get rid of that unhealthy tissue. So the immune system didn't make a mistake. The immune system just responded to what's happening at a tissue level. And so if that's the case, we've got to either stop triggering the immune system, so figure out why it's being triggered like that in the first place, or we have to figure out what the thyroid gland has absorbed, make sure that we're not continuing to bombard the body with that toxic chemical, and then help the body try to clear that out. And that will help reduce that damaging response on the thyroid gland. And then we can work to try to heal and repair that tissue so that your body can start producing thyroid hormone the way it's supposed to. The last issue that we see a lot of times with thyroid hormone is interference. And this is where something else is affecting the thyroid ability to either produce, convert or utilize or transport the thyroid hormone to wherever it has to go within the body. And this is where we really start digging into other things that are going on. One of the most common things that we see that triggers that interference type of an issue is estrogens. And that's why females suffer with hypothyroidism at such a high rate compared to males, because females have much more circulating estrogen, and that affects the transport and the binding of thyroid hormone to the cells. So if we have really high estrogens, if we've got hormonal imbalances or deficiencies, that will absolutely play a role in the thyroid health. And we can take more thyroid hormone, and again, we may feel a little bit better, but we're not solving the problem because it's a hormonally driven issue. And until we can balance out those hormones, the thyroid's never going to function the way it's supposed to. So these are all things that are really important to understand. So again, if you just got diagnosed with a thyroid issue, if you're trying to come off your medication, if you just want more answers, the key is that we've got to ask those 4 questions. It's understanding, do we have a conversion issue, an interference issue, a destruction issue, or a production issue? And once we can get testing done to realize what's actually going on and look at how your body's responding, then we can work to improve the way your body responds and make sure that we're reducing any of those stresses that are causing it to respond that way. And when we can do that, we can get the body to start to heal, and we can start to make a lot of positive improvements so that you can avoid the medications, come off the medications if that's what you want to do. So just know there is hope. There are other opinions. There's other things that you can do. So don't just rush into a decision without making sure that you have all the facts. So if it's something that you'd like to have a conversation, we can always have a conversation about that. Drop into the comments below. Be happy to answer any of your questions. And again, my goal is just to make sure that all of you guys are making the informed decisions for your health and for your family as you can. So smash the like button, follow along, and we'll look forward to seeing you guys in the next video.